Hello again, everybody. This is Mr. Andrews. Today we're talking about Andrew Jackson. You can use this PowerPoint presentation as a review, or perhaps see this as your study guide for the Chapter 14 test. Here we go. Andrew Jackson's Chapter 14 subject. In section number 2, we talked about his moving from the frontier, growing up in the frontier as a young man, and then moving all the way to the White House one day. During his presidential bid, the Democratic Party is formed. They are supporters of Andrew Jackson. The party promises that people would be represented, meaning ordinary farmers, workers, and the poor, not the rich and the upper class, who controlled mostly the Republican Party. And remember, please, that the Republican Party of Jackson's time is not the same Republican Party that we have today, even though the rich and upper class seem to have a home in both of those parties. Jacksonian democracy was known as the common people controlling government. So his whole plan, his idea, the people that were behind him, the Democrats, were an idea or a philosophy that common people, everyday Joes, people like me, would control the government and should control the government. Moving on, in section number 3, we saw pictures and we did a little bit of work with the overhead on the inauguration of Andrew Jackson. The idea of the common man again, the Democratic Party, the common man, meaning all men, rich or poor, educated or not educated, share the same opportunities and they share the same dangers. And if that's being true, then they should also share the same rights. And that right that they talked about mostly in our book was the right to vote. All right. That same process, if you think about, if you talk to your grandparents, they could tell you about during the Vietnam War in the 1960s. There were men being sent off to war, young men that were 18 years old sent to Vietnam, and they did not have the right to vote. So it didn't make a lot of sense then, and the same thing was happening in Jackson's time, where poor people, uneducated people that were trying to grow this country, that fought in the wars, were not able to vote, and that was wrong. Again, the basis of the Democratic Party, that of the common man. In section number 4, Jackson's approach to governing. 3 things were talked about in this section. One of them was the kitchen cabinet. Jackson surrounding himself with friends and supporters, and they would meet in the kitchen. Remember, the presidential cabinet are the Secretary of State, Secretary of War, Secretary of the Treasury. This cabinet was more his friends and supporters, that they would meet together in the kitchen, which is why it's called the kitchen cabinet, and they would discuss what they thought the direction the country should be going in, because Jackson, as president, had some power. A civil servant is an employee of the government, and the spoil system, to the winner goes the spoils. Because Jackson wins, the spoil system is his ability to then reward people that were supporting him politically with government jobs, with those civil servant jobs. So he could fire people that were there before he got into office and replace those people with people that were friends of his. All right, if you talk to your parents, and once you get through high school, and if you go to college, get through college, you're going to find sometimes it may not be what you know, it's more important about who you know at times. And in this case, Jackson rewarded the people that supported him with jobs in the government. Section number 5 talks about the nullification crisis. The nullification crisis is based on the story of, and it's a true story, it's not a story that's false, a story of higher taxes being placed on imports for the purpose of encouraging consumers to buy goods made in the United States. This happens all of the time, where we have this idea that if we made items imported from other countries more expensive, then Americans would buy things that we build here at home. It didn't work then, and it's at times works today, but sometimes it doesn't work, and this is why. At that time, we were trying to build things here in America, in Maine and New Hampshire, in the northern colonies, the northern states at this time, and the factories were producing goods. People were still buying goods from England or from France or from Spain. So a way to get people to buy things from America would be to raise the taxes on the items that were being imported. Makes sense. Sounds good. Problem was, it's not good for the South. In the South, they weren't making things, they were growing things, cotton and rice and indigo, cash crops. I left off tobacco as well, cash crops. Well, if a country like France is sending us sweaters and we're sending cotton to France, but we're taxing the sweaters when they get here, guess what they're going to do to the cotton? They're going to tax it. So it would hurt the South, but meanwhile, the factories in the North that are making sweaters, they're able to sell their sweaters for cheaper because there's not the tax on them that imports would have. All right, so the South feels that the tax favors the North, and therefore it's unconstitutional because the tax is supposed to affect everyone equally. John Calhoun, who was Andrew Jackson's vice president at the time, he was also from South Carolina, and he declared that this tax, this tariff, was null and void or illegal based on the 9th and 10th Amendment of states' rights. All right, Calhoun is saying we're not going to pay this tax. It's not legal to put a tax that only affects some people. Jackson has said, okay, I understand, and he had the tax lowered. But the South remained unhappy, and they threatened to secede from the Union. Not the first time we're going to hear that. We hear it again during the Civil War, and actually there are states talking about it today. All right, secession means that when you break away from somebody. We'll see that definition on the next slide in a second here. Jackson said, if you're talking about secession, I'll have you hung. He's going to hang people. He's going to find a tree and hang them if people try to secede. The South finally stops their talk of secession. John Calhoun ends up losing his job with Andrew Jackson when he is reelected. All right, a couple of vocabulary terms from section number 5. The tariff, meaning a tax imposed by the government on goods imported from another country. And secede, or the secession, or to secede, means to withdraw from an organization or an alliance. So we're going to see that word a lot. Please make sure that you know what that one means. In section number 6, Jackson battles the Bank of the United States. Jackson also felt like he did not favor certain things. He felt that the bank had favored just the rich at the expense of farmers and workers, as well as small state banks. He distrusted Biddle. Biddle was the gentleman who was in charge of the bank, the head of the bank. And at the time, he was running for re-election for the 1832 election. He was running against Clay. Remember, Clay was the Secretary of State underneath John Quincy Adams. Clay supports a bill to renew the bank charter, the national bank. It wasn't up for renewal, but Clay felt that if I go through this right now, Jackson will have to veto the bill, and if he vetoes the bill, he's going to lose all the rich vote. Or if he signs the bill for the bank, he's going to lose all the farmers' votes. So he feels that either way, Jackson's going to have to do something with this bill that will cost him the presidential election. Unfortunately, Clay didn't do the math. Jackson vetoes the bill and won re-election because there were more farmers than rich folk. And because of the Democratic Party and getting everyone the right to vote, white males that is, that he was able to win re-election. Jackson then goes about ruining the national bank by starving the bank, taking the money out of the national bank and putting it into state banks, known as his pet banks, all right, where the states then can use the money to loan out to people to buy farmland. Finally, the last section in chapter number 14 with Jackson is his policy as to Native Americans, or in our book's case, Indians, all right? A few things to know in this section. First, the 5 civilized tribes. Most Native Americans had moved west of the Mississippi River. Those that stayed were mostly in the southeast, and they had given up hunting and became farmers. They had developed written language, newspapers, being able to read and write. They adopted a constitution model after the United States Constitution. They were very successful, all right, and they had a community and a system of government, everything exactly similar to what we had. So why is it that Jackson wants them removed? Well, the reason behind it, and we've talked about this before in our class, is money. It's greed, all right? Plantation owners and wealthy settlers moving west, and even poor settlers, looked at the Indian land as a way to make money, to grow cotton. They need land to grow cotton. They grow cotton. They sell cotton. They make money. Case closed. Jackson petitions Congress and says, hey, pass this law so that I can then trade with the Indians and give them land west of the Mississippi River for the land that we need that's here. West of the Mississippi River, not real good for farming. Where the Georgian land was, great land for farming. Congress passes the bill with the stipulation this was not to be done by force. South Carolina then rules in 1831 that the Indians had a right to keep their land and not be moved. That case goes to the Supreme Court, and they agree that the people could not be moved. Jackson goes against the court and has the Indians moved regardless. That act in itself by Jackson of going against the Supreme Court ruling could have got him impeached because he was not holding up his role as President of the United States, but that did not happen. What did happen later, though, is something called the Trail of Tears, and that's when Martin Van Buren, Jackson's vice president during his second term, has the Cherokee Indians move from Georgia west to what is now present-day Oklahoma. During this movement of over 17,000 Cherokee Indians, thousands die along the way. People are not allowed to stop to bury them. Very sad time, and we'll watch a video on that clip there. There was also a tribe of Indians in Florida. Some of them moved, others stayed in the swamps there and hid out and did their battles as they could, and those were known as the Seminole Indians. And